Enter.
Your Grace.
Calm down, Menelo. What's all this fuss about?
He comes.
Who comes?
The Tiefling.
The Tiefling? The Tiefling? Where? Here? Now?
Yes, Your Grace. He's nearing the estate as we speak.
Why wasn't I told in advance?
He just showed up.
He just... Never mind. Tell the servants to let him in.
Yes, Your Grace.
Dradon, you live.
I do. Surprised?
Actually, yes. I mean, it's been a year.
14 months.
So long, eh? How did it go? I mean, 14 months is a long time. Do you have it?
Straight to the point, I see.
Ha! Desna smiles. My buyer will be most pleased. How do I know that it isn't a forgery?
It's not.
I warned you, Dradon. My buyer would see through any forgery or illusion.
You need not worry. This is King Gaspadar's signet.
I shall take your word for it. I do wonder why there's such a great interest in this finger.
It's the ring that matters.
The ring, then. Doesn't look all that valuable. Is it magical?
Not as far as I can tell.
Curious. I must say, the amount my buyer is willing to pay seems absurd when I see the item firsthand.
You don't know the significance of this ring?
I'm a buyer and seller of rare treasure. The significance of that treasure is usually not something I'm bothered with. I actually try to avoid knowing it at times.
And why is that?
Some of my buyers are shady, to put it mildly. They order an item, I hire someone like you to find it, and they pay me for my services. I don't necessarily want to know what they use the item for, or what damage they might cause. I prefer to keep my conscience clear. That said, the Pathfinder Society, the Aspis Consortium, several Andoran government officials, and even House Thrune is searching for this ring. I can't help but ask, why?
It is King Gaspadar's signet. It is a beacon of hope that could rally the enemies of House Thrune and throw the nation of Cheliax into a new civil war.
A new civil war? You mean like the Chelish civil war?
Yes.
Oh. Well, that is valuable.
And as powerful as any magical item.
But how or why is this particular ring a beacon of hope for the enemies of House Thrune?
There is much to it. To understand what goes on there today, one must know the history of Cheliax, though that history is a complicated one. Even more so now that the thrice-damned House Thrune actively is altering and in some cases erasing the past. Fortunately, there are still records of Cheliax's true history, both within and outside of the nation, but they are few.
Do you know of the nation's true history?
I don't claim to know all of it, but I've come to know a lot of it.
Dradon, I didn't take you for being a scholar.
I'm not, but I was born in Cheliax, and in order to get this ring, I had to do a lot of research and travel the nation.
I'm intrigued. Would you care to tell me about the nation?
I should be moving before nightfall. The road is long.
I'll have my servants prepare one of the guest rooms for you. You can stay the night. And we can share this bottle of White Rose Chardonnay while you share your tale.
A glass of wine does sound good. Very well. I shall tell my tale and rest here for the night.
Marvelous. Please, sit down. Make yourself comfortable. You were saying that in order to know the current Cheliax, one must know its history. Please, enlighten me.
It is said that Kelets once roamed the lands that are now Cheliax, and that Aslanti explorers intermingled with them. These are claims that date back to before the Age of Darkness, and as everyone knows, it's hard to confirm anything before the Earthfall. What we know for certain, and what really matters, is that in 1520, Taldor's Third Army of Exploration came and extended the nation's western borders to the Arcadian Ocean. The army was led by General Corin, who found the Kelet inhabitants to be peaceful and welcoming. It was at this time that a military outpost known as Corentin was established. Named after the army's general, Corentin is where Cheliax was born, and the following centuries saw the military outpost grow into a large city. Roughly 1,000 years after the outpost had been built, in the region that is now known as Rahadum, the religious war known as the Oath Wars had raged for 60 years and devastated the land. The philosopher Kalim Unaku of the city-state Azir wrote the laws of mortality, forbidding the worship of gods in the city-state. All temples were burned to the ground, and all clerics were expelled. The rest of the land quickly followed suit, and the worship of gods became illegal in the region. That year, many expelled clerics and worshippers sought refuge in Corentin, and in that same year, construction of an immense bridge that would come to be known as the Arch of Aroden began. See, when the clerics came to Corentin, the increased religious fervor caused unrest in the city. This compelled the then Lord Kevet Kemoch to initiate the building of the bridge, not only as a tribute to Aroden, but also as a way to bring the faithful together for a common cause. Kemoch's initiative ended the unrest and united the city. The bridge was built within 50 years, and as time went on, Corentin's influence grew and expanded. It had started as a military outpost, grown into a great city, and as other settlements were established in the region, it grew even more into a frontier region called Cheliax. In 3007, the region was formally incorporated as a province of Taldor. Back then, the city of Ostenso was the provincial capital, but in 3991, it moved to the city of Westport as its position on the Adivian River provided better access to the nation's interior. 90 years later, in 4081, Cheliax broke away from Taldor. The then governor, an ambitious man named Aspex, knew that Taldor was using most of its resources in an attempt to fight off the Kadirian invasion to the east, and that the Empire wouldn't be able to muster any real military resistance. And so, Aspex placed himself on the throne of Cheliax, declaring it an independent nation.
Just like that.
Not as simple, of course, but when he placed himself on the throne of Cheliax, most Taldane aristocrats in the region saw that they had much to gain by being the first generation of a new gentry and supported the new king. Aspec's first act as self-proclaimed king was to destroy the Taldan phalanx in Westport. He then convinced Andoran and the Strix of Devil's Perch to join his cause. He then annexed the Taldan provinces of Galt and Isker by threat of force. Following this, he marched his army to the western borders of Taldor, forcing the rulers there to sign a treaty recognizing the independence of Cheliax. Aspex set up his royal court in Westport and renamed the city to West Crown. He was given the honorific of the Even-Tongued, and the independence of Cheliax and the power grab that followed is known as the Even-Tongued Conquest due to its diplomatic and mostly bloodless nature.
Aspects, the Even-Tongue of Cheliax.
Not much time would pass after the Even-Tongued Conquest before the new empire of Cheliax sought to expand its borders once more. In 4137, the grandson of Aspects, Prince Haliat I, sailed an armada of Chelish warships to the Isle of Kortos, where he laid siege to Absalom. The siege was a failure, and Prince Haliat returned to Cheliax, defeated and shamed. When he returned, he found that the population of Cheliax had started calling him the Mad Prince due to his folly.
The prince has become mad.
In an attempt to prove that he wasn't mad, he took the remainder of his besieging forces across the Hesperith Strait to the northern region of Rahadum called Kari. Kari put up little resistance, and the Garundi land was annexed as a part of Cheliax. Haliat may have been called the Mad Prince, but securing the land on both sides of the Hesperith gave Cheliax control of the entire Arch of Aradin and one of the most strategic trade routes in the Inner Sea. The following year, the prince sent an armada of ships down the western coast to Desperation Bay in order to establish a Chelish colony farther south. Back in 4111, explorers had scouted the ancient Gulgan ruins on the Isles of the Shackles as a possible location for a new colony. But the explorers had been so disturbed by the images of cannibalism and other atrocities they found there that they declared the place cursed. But they had found a suitable region further south, and in 4138, a new Chelish colony was established. The colony was named after the Mad Prince's favorite horse, Sargava, and it would become the most successful colony of the empire not directly bordering on the nation. And this was despite the ongoing conflict between the colonists and the Mwangi natives.
Wasn't Multhoon a part of Cheliax once?
Yes, but that came at a later time, when the descendant of the Mad Prince sought to expand the nation even further. In 4305, the ambitious Emperor Haliat III started a 100-year-long period of Chelish expansion that would become known as the Ever War. Haliat III had his eye on Multhoon, for like Andoran, Isker, and Golt, Multhoon had followed Cheliax's lead and seceded from Taldor during the Even-Tongued Conquest. But unlike the other nations that had given allegiance to Cheliax, Multhoon had remained independent. Haliat III intended to change that. Multhoon's defenses were disorganized, and while they did all they could to fight Cheliax, the conquest of Multhoon ended after 6 years, and Chelish territory expanded to the southern border of Lastwall. Emperor Haliat meant to conquer Lastwall as well, but the Seasoned Knights of Ozim were a different force to be reckoned with. Also, Cheliax understood the importance of Lastwall and the Crusaders' responsibility of guarding Gallowspire, the prison of the Whispering Tyrant. And so, after a year of uncertain conflict, Haliat III abandoned his ambition of making Lastwall a part of Cheliax. But the expansion of Cheliax had just begun, and over the next 90 years, the Empire pushed to expand into Nidol, Berisia, and the hold of Belkacin. If Prince Haliat I had gotten the title of Mad Prince due to his failure in claiming Absalom, Emperor Haliat III could easily have been dubbed the Insane Emperor. He tried to take Absalom twice with even less success than his forefather. Nidol fought off Cheliax for 30 years until the conflict ended in a diplomatic conquest.
A diplomatic conquest?
Yes, as far as I can tell, it was the Black Triune, the undisputed rulers of Nydol that ordered the nation's surrender. And while Nydol became a part of Cheliax, it never strayed from its devotion to the Midnight Lord. In 4402, Cheliax became even more aggressive and sought to annex the lands of the Linorm kings with the intention of colonizing Varisia from the north. A Chelish armada of 30 ships made a landing at the settlement of Hal Grim, thinking they could overrun the northern barbarians. But the invasion failed, and on the third day, the Chelish armada was lit afire, and most of the Chelish soldiers were killed by Ulfin warriors and shield maidens. The few survivors were sent back to Cheliax with barrels filled with heads of the dead to serve as a warning.
Dear gods.
Yes, it's not wise to underestimate the barbarians of the north. The only success for Cheliax in those last years of the Everwar was when Halleck IV established Korvosa in 4407 in the southern part of Varisia. From here he hoped to expand and civilize the rest of the region. 3 years after the founding of Korvosa, though, efforts to invade the hold of Belkacin and Varisia ceased, and the Everwar ended in 4410.
100-year expansion attempt which mostly failed. Sounds expensive.
And so it was. The war coffers of Cheliax were nearly empty. Its naval power was greatly diminished, and the Chelish army could no longer continue any further conquest. But still, the nation stood strong, and in the coming centuries, Cheliax enjoyed a time of peace and stability. A time where the nation's focus shifted to studying, understanding, and preparing for the prophecies of the Starfall Doctrine, which is a series of...
Dradon, I know what the Starfall Doctrine is. The prediction of Araden's return and the coming of the Age of Glory, which we all know never came. A copy of the prophecies are written in the former Cathedral of Araden, or what is now known as the Almas Lodge, home to the Pathfinder Society in Almas. It's even written in Aslanti.
Well, this is where this ring becomes relevant. King Gaspadar was a devout follower of Araden and a staunch believer in the Starfall Doctrine. The Church of the Last Aslanti preached Gaspadar's divine mandate, and together they prepared the Empire for Araden's return. King Gaspadar dismantled much of the nation's bureaucracy and was ready to relinquish his throne. The living god would rule Cheliax, and from there lead the rest of the world into the Age of Glory. The word of Araden's supposed return had reached the farthest corners of the world, and worshippers flocked to Cheliax in hopes of seeing the holy event. But when the time came in 4606, Araden didn't return, and instead all of his clerics were cut off from their god, and the inner sea was hit by terrible storms that lasted for weeks. In Cheliax, the city of Deng was destroyed by an immense tidal wave, and the governmental structure within the nation fell apart. Araden was no more, and that meant that Gaspadar had lost his divine mandate.
Araden! Araden! Where have you gone? Araden!
Tensions rose between noble houses, and Cheliax was fast descending into chaos. The aristocracy tried to keep the nation together and maintain order, but they barely prevented outright rioting and anarchy. In 4608, two ruling noble houses from neighboring counties clashed, and their dispute turned physical. This set off a chain reaction of noble allegiances, and the nation fell into an all-out war, the Chelish Civil War. One of the two houses was the then little-known House Thrun. The other house, well, all records of the house have been stricken from history, so no one truly knows. The Civil War raged on for 30 years with nobles fighting for a seat of power. During this time, King Gaspadar was assassinated. This brought the conflict to new heights, for Gaspadar left no heir, and this, a symbol of the rightful ruler of Cheliax, was gone, ripped from his hand along with his finger. The throne became the ultimate prize for the war's victor. Nobles had fought each other with no clear leader, but after Gaspadar's death, it quickly turned into a two-sided conflict. On one side was the noble House Davian, a strong naval power with close ties to Sargava, and on the other side was House Thrun, who bolstered its forces with devils. As the civil war raged on, several vassal states broke away from Cheliax to form sovereign states of their own. The first to do so was Sargava in 4609. Then, in 4632, came Morthun, which had learned its lesson during the Everwar and had established a much more martial society. There were still wealthy families within Morthun that backed their allies within Cheliax financially, but officially the new nation was neutral. The year after, Corvosa reluctantly cut ties with Cheliax when it learned that the Empire no longer had any real interest in its Revisian colony. The civil war had weakened Cheliax greatly, but the beginning of the end would come at the Battle of 100 Kings. A battle where House Davian's forces, backed by Sargava, attacked House Thrun in the city of Corrington. It was a decisive battle where House Thrun emerged as the victor and House Davian lost all hope of claiming the throne. The civil war came to an end in 4640 as House Thrun took control of the nation. That same year, Queen Abigail I ascended the throne as the infernal magistrix of Cheliax.
Infernal magistrix. But when did Nidal break from Cheliax?
Nidal had supported House Thrun throughout the Civil War, who in turn had promised to withdraw all Chelish agents from the Land of Shadows should they win the conflict. Queen Abigail I honored their agreement, and Nidal seceded from Cheliax and regained its independence.
But what was this you mentioned with history being erased or changed?
House Thrun understands the power history has and how it can inspire, so they erase it or change it to exaggerate their influence throughout history and to grow their current power. Enemies of House Thrun may find their family names stricken from the histories, their legal documents erased, their property seized and granted to their rivals, and their families exiled, executed, or sold into slavery. If the thrice-damned house wills it, any trace that you ever existed can be erased.
Please, let my daughter go.
Why, that's horrible.
Every third month, the Imperial Printing Press roll out new official histories for libraries, schools, and universities. At the same time, the Hell Knight Order of the Rack retrieves outdated copies and are set to burn them. Owning old versions of histories, especially those predating House Thrun, is of course illegal. This was one of the first decrees the new queen issued.
I see. So this was the beginning of House Thrun's rule.
And the beginning of the Cheliax we know today. House Thrun quickly restored order through draconic laws and severe changes. Most notably was to move the capital from West Crown to Egorian. And most drastic of all was making the Church of Asmodeus the official state religion.
Drastic indeed. Madness, I'd say. I always wondered why the people would accept that.
You have to understand that Cheliax was always a nation of law and order and hierarchies, something the Church of Asmodeus offers, perhaps more than any other powerful institution could. and I imagine that the promise of peace and order carries a lot of weight after 30 years of bloodshed. Also, when House Davian, the only force that could have stood up to House Thrune, was destroyed, I don't think the people felt they had much of a choice. But tensions were still high, despite House Thrune's ascension. While all nobles swore fealty to the throne, among them were still those that had supported House Davian during the Civil War, and a game of politics was still going on.
These documents show our payments. We are loyal to House Thrune.
House Thrune knew these nobles were a liability and sought ways to disenfranchise them. But as fate would have it, the writings of the Galtan philosophers Stahl Yubanich and Hoseta would save House Thrune the trouble of excising them. Their critique of Cheliax sparked the Red Revolution in Galt in 4667, and soon after, the People's Revolt in 4669 here in Andoran.
The revolution shall be peaceful.
The two vassal states split from the Empire, and along with them, most of the nobles that had supported House Thrune's enemies during the Civil War. Cheliax had become a shadow of its former self, and only Isger remained as a vassal state. After Abigail I was murdered by her own son in 4672, there have been several monarchs to hold the title of infernal majestor or majestrix. Most of them have met an untimely and violent end. Today, Abigail II is the infernal majestrix, and her cruelty and evil ways make her the perfect ruler of the infernal empire of Cheliax.
Greetings! Thank you for watching the Tower of Tomes. If you like the content, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting. Also, please have a look at the Tower of Tomes Patreon page. There will be a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.